Okay. Oops. Oh, come on. There we go. All right, so this is a list of about, it's really 12 things, but I'm going to for 13 to include the Haftarah, because I think the Haftarah kind of sums up what we're saying about these previous ones. And so you'll notice that color to draw your attention to the fire or the death image, as opposed to the water aspect of that particular camp, that particular action. In this case, the Chukkat. This is a chok. The chok, red heifer, is something that is supposed to be mysterious. You're not supposed to figure out everything about the red heifer. And I know that's not very American. We typically like to figure things out and show our list and say, that's done, I understand it, I can move on to the next thing. But with the red heifer, every year when you read it, you're supposed to walk away still with a sense of mystery about it. It's not so logical. But basically, there's a sprinkling, there's a purification that needs to take place after you come into contact with a corpse. And it mentions specifically a corpse where someone has died in a tent. And in a very simple level that just, the Peshat, we can say there's a tent and somebody died in there. We were in there, now we need this purification of the third and seventh day. Now we need the sprinkling of the water with the ashes of the red heifer. But if you'll remember, it says in the prophets of how he stretched out the heavens like a tent, like an ohel. And so in that sense, because there are corpses in this world, we're all unclean in a sense. We all need purification because we are under a tent heavens. And there are corpses walking around us. We see lots of dead people walking around. There's death everywhere. So ultimately, I think there's going to be a greater purification. And maybe at that time, we'll understand the red heifer a little bit better in a much larger sense than we do right now. Because right now, it's only going to take effect to have a temple. So the heifer has to be red. And red, remember, it can represent the nefesh, the soul, which is a hot sort of thing. When your soul leaves your body, then it begins to cool. So the soul adds that element of heat to a human being. The slaughter, we're going to equate the death or the slaughter, and in this case, as we move through the Torah portion, war, as something that would heated, burning, red, and so forth. So we've got that section to start out the Torah portion, and then it moves into the rebellion after Miriam dies, and we know that the well that gave the water to the 12 tribes was associated with her. And once she dies, all of a sudden it says, now there was no water. And I think last year we went through that part of the Torah portion with a lot of detail, where we could see how that in Miriam, the merit, her merit, we have the well of water that went out to the 12 tribes in the wilderness. And so when she dies, the well dries up. That leads to the murmuring and the complaining about the water. And it's going to lead to the next step, our number 3, where Moses and Aaron become very angry. Mistake. They call the people rebels when they're actually in a state of mourning for Miriam. And instead of speaking to the rock for water, they strike the rock and bring forth the water. They have to strike it twice. And there's some discussion as to whether he says this rock, and he hits it and nothing happens. And so he strikes another rock. He wasn't even sure which rock it was supposed to be. We don't know if that's true or not, but it does come into the discussion because of the grammar of the sentence. At any rate, when Miriam's gone, the water disappears, the people grumble. And remember the principle of the 3 signs, that when my Messiah came, there would be 3 signs that he would want to manifest. For the sake of Aaron, the pillar of cloud was given. And one thing we know about the pillar of cloud is that it represents the angel of the presence who had the divine name, and he was given the power not to forgive. He says, if you rebel against him, then he will not forgive your sin. So we can assume that he also does have the power to forgive. And we see Yeshua getting in that kind of trouble when he goes around healing. It's not that big a deal, but when you sin, it becomes a huge deal. So we can see him as a healer coming in the merit of Aaron. The manna fell in the merit of Moses. And so Yeshua constantly identifies himself as the bread of heaven. And if you noticed, I think it was week before last, I'm losing track of my weeks now, where I pulled up those verses that show how the people grumbled when he called himself the bread of heaven. So like a replay of our Torah portions, they're grumbling about the very same things. But then the third sign, we've got the pillar of cloud, we've got the man in the wilderness, but the third sign is in the merit of Miriam. And the tradition is that Moses took that rock, the water, and the merit of Miriam, and he concealed at the bottom of the Galilee. What do we know about Yeshua? He began his pre-career in the Galilee. So when he came with all three signs, which probably you wouldn't be looking for those signs unless you're Jewish and you had that particular tradition of the merit of Moses, Aaron, and Miriam. But we have this rebellion. After Miriam dies, the people are discouraged. Apparently, they're not given time to mourn like they were with Aaron and Moses. And so they begin to rebel and ask for water. And Moses and Aaron actually call them rebels. They say, look here, you rebels. And if you look at the root word, rebel, you'll see Miriam. It's almost like they're saying, you followers of Miriam, what's your problem here? And they become very angry. So the fire basically lights up for Moses and Aaron, and they make the mistake of striking the rock. And the clue that this well of water that was given in the merit of Miriam has something to do with Yeshua is the wording of how he rebukes Aaron and Moses and says, you're not going to go to the land. Even though they're in the land, by the way. They're actually down in the territory of Shimon when these things happen. But in terms of entering the Jordan, the Yarden, that's how you have to go into the land to activate the covenant. There's a crossing there where they're going to have to cross in that place, renew the covenant in that place. And so he says, you did not sanctify me as holy. You didn't believe me in this incident of the rock. And some of the commentaries too say it really goes back again to the golden calf, that this issue was still kind of up in the air, that it wasn't really forgotten because of what they forfeited with the golden calf, that when Israel said, we will do, we will hear, had the opportunity as they went into the land to again be elevated up into the garden. And when they worshiped the golden calf, again, they lost that opportunity of immortality. So it was a big deal. The golden calf was a very big deal. And that sin is still kind of, nipping at their heels in this journey through the wilderness. So that takes us to number 4, which is they come to the territory of Edom. And Edom, or Edom, remember, it's Esau. And he comes to be known as the Red One in the literature because of course, we've got words like Adamah, Adam, Adom, which is red. And that's the description of Esau. He was red and hairy all over like a beast. And so they come to that border, and again, the water comes back. And they say, no, we're not going to give you any water. We're not even going to sell it to you. So they continue on, and there at the border, we have the death of Aaron. And again, they're right on the border with Edom, where they've been refused water, Plus, Aaron is dying because of the water, because he did not sanctify the Holy One in that incident after Miriam died. Then it seems like we've got this strange little aside where they go to Arad and they destroy Arad, and then they call it Chormah. And it just seems like a little footnote, really, to what's going on in the text. Like, oh, okay, then they went here, then they went there. But it's not because of what they named it, Chormah. You can hear the root Choram, and Choram means something that's dedicated. It can't be something that's destroyed, but it's actually something that's set apart and untouchable. That's going to come into play when we read the Haftarah about Jephthah's daughter. But there again, there's the burning, there's the destruction of Arad, and I didn't see anything in that little section speak to us of water or something that would cool the heat of that particular battle. Next, they go back to complaining about the water in the wilderness, and that's when the seraphim, which is the burning angels, they're burning beings, like seraph is to burn up. These are the seraphim. So they complain about the water, and again they get the fire. And Moses has to put the bronze serpent on the pole for them to look at, and then they have to look up and basically face their own souls. It was their own souls that caused them to complain, their own red one, their own nefesh. And so until they acknowledge that on that pole, they're not going to be healed. Next, they come to a camp in Avot, and excuse me, in Avot, it doesn't tell you this text, but I have some pictures of Avot I want to show you so that you will see a furnace, and you will also see a well in that place, that you will see that, again, interplay of the fire and the water in that specific place. It's called Ir today, or the city of Avot. Not city, town, Ir. Number 9, they're going to camp near Moab and the Amorites, which is going to circle us back to last night's lesson, the descendants of Lot. That's going to be important, again, as we look at what goes on in the Haftarah. And then next they go to Be'er, where the Amorites are crushed. And we studied that last year when we talked about the Song of the Will, where it says, spring up, O will. And that's one of the important songs of Israel. And the tradition there is the Amorites hid, and I'll have pictures of it for you. The Amorites carved or hid out in crevices up in the walls of the rock. And a miracle happened where the levels kind of mushed together. So the Israelites walked through, they had no idea that the Amorites were being smushed at the very time that they were walking through that body. And once they start to see the blood mingling with the water, that's when they realize that Adonai has made war for them and just crushed the Amorites without them really having to do anything. But seeing there at the end. From there, they address Sichon. He's defeated in war, and they take possession from the Jabbok to the Arnon rivers. And then they defeat Oshan. He's defeated in a war and camping in the plains of Moab beyond the Yarden. And there again, we've got our war, and it's taking us back to the plains of Moab, the descendants of Lot, and it mentions the Jordan River. So again, we've got our fire, we've got our water, and then we'll end up with the Haftarah where Jephthah goes to war against the descendants of Lot, Ammon, and unwittingly, or maybe wittingly, we can't really tell whether he suspected his daughter would greet him when he came home from war, but that's what happened. It seems like a strange, if you know you have children and they're likely to come out of the door when you return, it's either very foolish or and we'll look at maybe some things, maybe he did it on purpose, because it's going to circle us back to the red heifer. to the young cow who never worn a yoke. And she is actually going to be the substance of that which is going to cleanse from a corpse. And it's also going to mention specifically in the portion that it can be used if you've used the sword and you've touched a corpse because of the sword, then you need the ashes of this red heifer in order to cleanse you. So let's just move through here and look at some pictures. Let's just look at pictures here for a second. There's our red heifer, and her ashes burned up. And it's interesting, if you do go on a tour with us and we go up on the Mount of Olives, you can walk over not too far and you can see the place where they slaughtered the red heifer. And there's actually a mikveh over there where the person who burned her, once he performed the duties, he could actually immerse himself. And that's when you realize from that particular location where she was slaughtered, you can look directly across the Temple Mount. It's just a straight line. So you could see into the temple courts from that particular spot. And likewise, the people in the courts could look across the Kidron Valley and see them slaughtering the red heifer. And I believe that 9 heifers have been slaughtered in history. And Messiah, it'll say the Holy One himself, will slaughter the 10th for the next temple.
The same with the 10 songs.
Yeah, the 10 songs and the 10 heifers.
Yeah.
And this is the area where Miriam died. I think I've shown you this video before, but I'll let you just take a look at the area around there so you can get a grasp of what the Israelites were looking at when she died, how desolate it must have felt when she died, and all of a sudden there's no water at all. Of course, there is here. This is Miriam Spring or Ain Sin, but where they were, it was very desolate. So I don't throw aspersions on the Israelites for grumbling. I don't know that I would have done any better than they did. Hindsight, maybe. Know what I know now, yes, but knowing what they knew then, maybe not. I don't know that my faith is that great. If even Moses and Aaron messed up in the waters, I don't know if I'd have done any better. I doubt it. Seriously doubt it. Okay, and then it says they went to the border of Edom, and you can see the redness. For those of you that might be going on the Sukkot trip with us, if you choose to go down to Eilat, you'll be driving right through these mountains, these red mountains, and they're just as red. In fact, they're redder than they look on this picture. As you're driving through there, they're just blood red. So you get why Edom is called the red one, and that's where he made his home. But just remember about Edom, Edom is family. He's not part of the Israelites, but again, Edom, Esau, Ishmael, they are still family relations. So it's a grave for them to come to the border of Edom and be refused bread and water. And the Holy One's taking account of that when it happens. This is Ovot, where it says they camped at Ovot. And that tree, we don't know how many hundred years, but near a well, which the well is not working at this moment, but in historical times, you can still see the old camel trough, spice traders, caravans coming up through this area of Ovot because they're going to cross scorpions, ascend up. Remember, Israel's a crossroads. It's a trade route where lots of trade routes intersect. And so this would have been a stopping place for the caravans that would have had a water source, like a little oasis. But what I want you to see from here, and within sight, this mountain, and I know it doesn't look that high, but when you start climbing it is, very high, and it's not fun looking down. But at the top of this mountain adjacent to a boat, very top of there, you can find pottery. And it's from a furnace. They used to have furnaces up there, possibly even before the time of Solomon. And it was likely they were copper up there from Timnah, smelting it because the winds are so high on that mountain right there. So the heat that they could generate for a kiln, for a furnace, when they can get up high like that, that high wind allows to heat a fire hotter than you normally would, so that they can melt that stuff down for transportation. So there's our water at Ovot, and there's our fire on the mountain. And you can still climb up there and find pottery today. And this is the Arnon, the Valley of the Arnon. And this is where they say the Amorites hid out, that the armies hid out up in these cliffs. And as Israelites went through, and you can see the water running through there, that the Holy One, supernatural, just kind of collapsed those rocks onto the Amorites and smushed them. And the Israelites are just unwittingly walking through there thinking everything's okay. And at the very same moment, the Amorites are being crushed. And then when they start to see the blood running into the water, that's when they are able to sing that song, Spring Up a Well. Because they realize they've had a great deliverance and they didn't do anything. And I don't know about you guys, but I need more deliverances like that, where he just takes care of it. Less stress. I like those less stress deliverances. Here's you an overview of the land, so you can get an idea. Down there at the very bottom, below the Salt Sea, or the Sea of the Arava, you can see the territory of the Amorites, pretty close where I would have walked through. And just below that, that's Edom. That's where they would have camped adjacent to Edom. Right over there, in fact, from the Iravot mountain where the furnace is, you're looking right over into the mountains of Jordan. You see it says Moabites there to the right. They would have crossed through in that area, or they would have attempted to. They had to take a long route because Edom was so cranky and stingy. But as you move up, where it talks about they encountered the king of Bashan, as you move up, at the very top of the map, you can see Bashan. They're in the tribal territory of Moshe. Then right below, you see the territory of the Ammonites and Heshbon, where again, they're fighting the king there, taking back that territory where they had driven out the Moabites. And this history actually comes up in the Haftarah. We can read it in the Torah portion. And I don't know that I've ever read a Haftarah so line for line follows its Torah portion, because Jephthah, as he's corresponding to the king, he actually retells this history step by step. And it's pretty incredible. But basically, he says, you have tried to take this territory back for years. Why are you starting now? Why is it an issue now? Of course, it's always an issue with Israel. But that gives you the lay of the land. So you can kind of see where they were, for the most part, down here at the bottom in this wilderness. Then eventually circling around and coming back up, because where they're going to have to cross is down here near Jericho. They're going to have to cross the Jordan River, that river that descends. And we've talked a few of the past classes why it's important that they cross the Jordan. The who represents the Jordan, the one who descends from those headwaters of the Galilee. Okay. So it mentions the Book of Wars and the Torah portion. And we say, what Book of Wars? Well, I don't know. Do you? We don't know. There's there, but we don't always know the provenance. When we look at pseudepigraphal books like Enoch, in fact, there's two two volumes of pseudepigrapha that I've got on my bookshelf. But pseudepigrapha means fake name. That's literally what it means, fake name. So we don't know the provenance of that particular piece of writing. The book of Yasher, I know popular for a while, is a source, and you can use it as a historical source. The problem is we don't ever need to mistake it as scripture because you cannot verify its provenance. You don't know who wrote it, why they wrote it. Agendas can be hidden, but it's good as an extra resource, right? Like if you're trying to figure out what was going on in the first century in terms of the Judaisms that existed then, what's your closest written resource? It's going to be the Mishnah. Even though it's not written down until later, it's going to reflect what people understood in the first century. So you can use that historical source, and of course, the more reliable it is, the better. Some of these things, like the Gospel of Thomas, what do they call that? Apocrypha? No, not Apocrypha. That slip in my mind right now. Those sorts of things, you don't just need one grain of salt. You need the whole shaker when you read that stuff. You need really good filters on. At any rate, the Torah portion references the Book of Wars. And that's what I kind of picked up on, like all through this Torah portion, it's like back and forth between some sort of burning, war, killing, corpse, anger, impetuousness, speaking or acting too quickly, versus water, something that cools off, something that brings you back into balance, especially in the spiritual realms. That we all have this hot red one, but if it's not cooled with the spirit, with the water of the spirit, then it's just a total exercise of the nefesh or Edom. That's when you have Edomite problems. So I separated into two categories, just for the sake of order, so we could think about it. And with the Israelites, they're going to have internal problems and external problems. They're going to have internal burnings and they're going to have external burnings. And then on the right-hand side, it's going to be truly external. Right? It's not really with a family member at all. It's with the giants, and they're not members of the family in any way. But when we're talking about the Moabites and the Edomites and the Ammonites, they're really, distant relatives. And in the Middle East, that's a big deal. Even if somebody's a distant relative, you don't turn them away without bread and water. The Middle East is a very hospitable place. I mean, they might cut your throat the second you leave their house, but at least while you're in the house, you're treated very well. And especially in the Bedouin culture, no one is going to turn you away without bread or water. It's never at any point been part of their culture. So if you will compare that to what Rabbi Krieger was teaching last night about Sodom and Gomorrah and how inhospitable that culture was, you can see it wasn't just an Abraham problem or a Lot problem. It's like, in general, these people are so far over the top, they got to be completely destroyed. You can't rehabilitate this. It's too far gone. And that's really what worries me about justice in the world in general today. It's so far over the top twisted. I don't know if you can reform it without just wiping the slate clean and starting over. So many things that are just laws, implementation of laws, and not only that, we keep re-elect people that are making the stupid laws. I mean, we can't point our fingers at politicians when we elect them. We have to say it's symptomatic of our entire society when we re-elect people over and over who are, their whole way of thinking is twisted. And it's, the more you read our news, our political news and our legislative news, the less absurd Sodom and Gomorrah seem. In fact, it just seems like we're doing the same stuff. Different year, same story. So internal, the Israelite keeps having these civil wars. They keep complaining about water. They keep complaining about food. They keep complaining about leadership. I would classify that as a civil thing, a civil war. And it's the water and the food keep coming up, but in this Torah portion, it's the water that reappears over and over. And then they have wars with relatives like Edom, Moab, and Ammon. Those are extended members of the family, and things that shouldn't have come to a war with these particular nations. So where was the failure there? With Edom and Moab and Ammon, they didn't discern family relationship. Sometimes you make war against the people who are actually in the family. And I would say that goes on today as well. That seems symptomatic, again, of whether we want to call it Messianic Judaism, Hebrew roots, whatever, the names change. Not necessarily protecting these. Anyway, sometimes we discern who it is, and sometimes we need to, but just because they might be wearing tzitzit and wearing a kippah, it doesn't mean they're in the. So we need to discern those family relationships and make sure that we're providing bread and water to the right people. So the cure there, I believe, is if we go back to the beginning of the Torah portion, the red heifer and the water, the burning of the red heifer and the water, they're providing atonement for those situations. And you're going to see that later. Well, it depends what we get, but with the red heifer, it's understood that she is atonement for the golden calf. Remember, that golden calf is still following them around in the wilderness. There's residue, and that's part of the problem with Korach and the rebels. They're complaining to Moses, "You're not bringing us in," when they were part, of the reason that they can't go in. Again, it's so very much like our politics. People complain because you're not providing this, but you're the very reason we can't provide this. You're doing the things that that are putting the roadblock in place where we can't do it. So that's not Rabbi Krieger. That's the dog. And it's not me. But that red heifer, she's going to be that atonement for the golden calf. She's not had a yoke put upon her. And one thing I would really like to have teased out, but I wasn't sure how to do it yet. Maybe next year I'll figure it out. But the language where it says that she will not have had a yoke to go upon her, to go up. I mean, it's not alliteration, it's assonance. When you have a repetition of vowels within a line, and there's an incredible repetition of roots and vowels within that particular relate to the yoke, the red heifer, and how the yoke actually fits on her. But it's like Eve talks. God's had a yoke put upon her. She's never been married, and she never will be. The red heifer's never had a yoke put upon her, and she never will be. So she's providing atonement for the golden calf, for coming into contact with the corpse, because that's what the Israelites did at Mount Sinai with the golden calf. They were on the verge of attaining a type of resurrection when they went into the land, when they said, we will hear. Had they not worshipped the golden calf, they could have attained that level. Of course, our history might have been much different, but I think he would have had a plan in place. Regardless, maybe they would have been that light, and then the nations would have come to that light at that time. Maybe it wouldn't have taken so much longer. I don't know. Because it didn't happen, we can't, know what would have happened. But that red heifer is going to come along and say, you know what, you fell back into the realm of death with your sin, with your idolatry, and with your adultery. She's going to sprinkle so that you can become clean again. So those are your internal and extended family wars. The external are the truly foreign enemies. You've got, they're fighting giants. The text doesn't always tell us they're giants right in that place, but if you go to places in the Torah, it'll tell us people were giants. But you've got these completely foreign enemies, such as Og and Sihon. And what are the contentions? It might be over the water rights. It might be over peace. In the case of Jephthah, the Ammonites, after 300 years, they want to come back and retake territory. And typically when you retake territory in the Middle East, water is an essential thing. And so these territories like the Arnon and Bashan, where there would be water sources, those would be the places of contention. And again, they have to go to war with these giants and with these people holding this territory. And the cure, again, it's going to have to be the red heifer, because it specifically says, when the soldier kills with the sword, he's come into contact with a corpse. And so he, again, before he should in the temple, he's going to have to be cleansed on the 3rd and the 7th day. He's going to have to receive the sprinkling of the red heifer as atonement, coming in contact with the corpse. So, in the Haftarah, let's watch them.
About 113.
Oh, wow. Having fun. Let's go to the Haftarah, and I don't want to read all of it. So let's just, we know we're talking, I think in the English it's going to say Jephthah. Jephthah, it's hard to say in English, Jephthah. Jephthah is, to me, easier and prettier, because you hear like petach, opening, basically. But it says in verse 4, it says, after a period of 1, made war with Israel. And we know these are descendants of Lot with his daughter. And it happened when the children of Ammon made war with Israel that the Gileadite elders went to fetch Jephthah from the land of Tov, the land of Gud. They said to Jephthah, go forth and become our chief, and we will do battle with the children of Ammon. And then there's a conversation, because the way I understand is Jephthah was the son of a prostitute or a concubine. I'm not. I think the translation, my translation, whether you're going to get prostitute or concubine, but not exactly the full wife. And so him being obviously could be an embarrassment, but it says the Spirit of God was upon him to do war. And so the king of the children of Ammon, in verse 13, said to Jephthah's emissaries, because Israel took my land when it ascended from Egypt, from Arnon until the Yabok, until the Yarden, them in peace. And so starting with the next verse, Jephthah restates the history that's in this portion. Thus said Jephthah, Israel did not take the land of Moab and the land of the children of Ammon. For when Israel ascended Egypt, Israel went to the wilderness, till the Sea of Reeds, and they arrived at Kadesh. Israel sent emissaries to the king of Edom, saying, let me please pass through your land. The king of Edom did not listen. And also to the king of Moab did Israel send, but he was also not willing. So Israel sojourned in Kadesh. It went through the wilderness, went around the land of Edom and the land of Moab, and came to the eastern side of the land of Moab, for they encamped across the Arnon. But they did not enter the border of Moab. Arnon is the border of Moab. Then Israel sent emissaries to Sihon, king of the Amorites, king of Heshbon. And Israel said to him, let's please pass through your land until my place. But Sihon did not trust Israel to pass through his border. Rather, Sihon assembled all his people. They encamped at Yahaz, and he made war against Israel. Then Hashem, God of Israel, delivered Sihon and all his people into the hand of Israel, and he struck them. And Israel took possession of the entire land of the Amorite, the inhabitant of that land. They took possession of the entire border of the Amorite. from Arnon to the Yavok, from the wilderness to the Yarden. And now Hashem of Israel has driven out the Amorite from before his people Israel, and you would possess it. Do you not take into your possession that which your God Chemosh bequeaths you, that you may possess? But all that Hashem our God drives out from before us, we shall take possession of it. And he ends up going into the next Torah portion with Balak and Balaam. But basically, he's giving you a condensed version of the Torah portion. This is the order of things. And he says, who territory belongs to is entirely dependent upon what their God gives. So he's saying, don't you take whatever your God gives to you. If you go to battle and you win the battle, then you get the territory. And apparently that's reasonable in this day and time. But in our day and time, it's not reasonable at all, because time after time, the Arabs attack Israel. They drive them out. They drive them a little farther each time. They want to maintain that land, and the rest of the world says, oh, no. Why? Because they really believe in God. Because if they really believed in God, they would understand that Hashem is the one who has given them the power to take the territory to attack them. And that's this exact pattern that Jephthah is giving. He's taking the king of Ammon to school. He's saying, go back to history class, because it's the territory that's given into your hand that hold on to. And of course, in this generation, it's not seen that way at all. If you take the territory, someone attacks you in war. If you take their territory, then you're the bad guy. It's messed up as Sodom and Gomorrah. There's no logic. There's no reason to it. And of course, we know that Jephthah had dedicated his daughter. He says, the first thing that comes out of the door of my house, I'm going to offer up as a whole burnt offering. Now, did he offer up his daughter as a whole burnt offering? I doubt it. It can also mean, and this goes back to what we've learned about the case with Abraham and Sarah arguing over whether Isaac was literally supposed to be killed and burned, or whether he was simply just supposed to be lifted up as a offering, as a consecrated gift, completely dedicated to Hashem. And of course, Abraham says it means, kill and burn. Sarah says lift up. So she goes to intercede at Hebron, dies. And we know that, of course, the angel stops Abraham's hand so that he doesn't literally kill Isaac. But this is the same sort of thing, this consecration of the daughter. He knows that it's immoral, it's against Torah to pass your child through a fire. That's not Torah. Was it a foolish vow or was it intentional? That was my question. Because it seems like any reasonable man would know your daughter is going to be happy to see you when you come back from war, and whoever comes out of that door, it's going to be a family member. That's only logical. So, I doubt if she was literally offered on an altar of fire, that would be antithetical to the whole story. But was she consecrated completely to Adonai, kind of like a nun, where she couldn't marry at all, a virgin daughter, which again ties her right back into our red heifer. She's never going to be yoked in marriage. She can never be unequally yoked. That's the good news, but she can never be yoked at all. That's the bad news. And so her virginity and remains a virgin all of her life. And that became a custom for the Israelite girls to go up and mourn once a year with Jephthah's daughter, for that lost relationship, the relationship she would never be able to have. But that was atonement somehow for what Jephthah did. So Jephthah's daughter becomes kind of a red heifer for him. And that I wanted to tie it back to what Rabbi Krieger was teaching last night about Sodom and Gomorrah. And she pointed out some specific passages. And And this Genesis 19, 4 through 9, it says, before they lay down, the men of the city, the men of Sodom, surrounded the house, both young and old, people from every order. And they called to Lot and said to him, where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us that we may have relations with them. But Lot went out to them at the doorway and shut the door behind him and said, please, my brothers, do not act wickedly. Now, behold, I have 2 daughters who have not had relations with a man. So here's our red heifer again. They've not been yoked with a man. And weirdly, Lot offers his 2 daughters, his 2 virgin daughters, in place of the angels. If they're angels, then they're going to have the power to deliver if he will listen to what they're saying. Even if there's a war, the Sodomites can be delivered into his hand. Abraham demonstrated that, but of course, Lot has already demonstrated his inability to make war successfully. But he has now. Before he had Abraham to come take him back when he was kidnapped. And these same players are coming in geographically into this story, talking about the Torah portion, whether we're talking about the Haftarah, or whether we're talking about this initial destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. So he says, let me give you my daughters who have never worn a yoke. Let me bring them out to you and do to them whatever you like. Only do nothing to these men, inasmuch as they shelter of my roof. But they said, stand aside. Furthermore, they said, this one came in as an alien, and already he is acting like a judge. Now we will treat you worse than them. So there's a lot of things to deconstruct out of that. But I pulled out a few items, and I'm going to, if Rabbi Krieger has anything to add to it. And I think you've probably picked out some parallels. And so we'll open it up for questions here in a sec. But we see that it's like chormah in our Torah portion, which means put under the ban, or something that's completely devoted, but it can also mean destroyed. So for Jephthah's daughter, what was destroyed? The potential of a family relationship because of her father's vow. But in a way, maybe he saw that as some sort of atonement for the descendants of Lot, where that Lot had been so eager to give his daughters over, to let those family relationships of the future be destroyed through rape, basically. Again, that would take you into the red category, not the blue. He thought he was being blue, but he was actually being red, right? Stripping someone's virginity in a violent way. There's nothing, cooling or spiritual about that. But it was because of a vow that Jephthah's daughter is under the ban, basically. She's set aside. But remember, it's been a few Torah portions ago, we talked about how the ashes of the red heifer were particularly looked at in rabbinic literature connected to the Nazarite vow. Because the Nazarite was one who could be caught up in context in a tent where somebody died, and he had to cleanse, immerse on the 3rd and the 7th days. And then he had to be sprinkled with the ashes of the red heifer because before he could really go back about his Nazarite business and start over. And that tells you he wasn't probably paying attention, because if you know someone is that ill, you don't go in that tent. If you're a Nazarite, you know that you can't do that. You're like a priest in that instance. You know better than to go in there. So he wasn't really guarding his vow very much. He was maybe the same thing with Jephthah. Maybe he was a little loose with his vow. We know Lot was in terms of his offer. But I think, again, we see these young ladies, like the red heifer, being offered as atonement for a breakdown in family relationships, for rash vows, for speaking and acting foolishly, even if we look at Miriam, you know, as again a type of that red heifer, that as long as she's there, there's the water. There's that ash, water mixed with the ash of burning. Kind of keeps things on an even keel. The second she dies, then you lose that influence. And so I think that's the end. Yeah, it is. And do you have anything you want to bring into it? Because I'm going to try to make this dog quit snoring.
No, I was touching with my foot.
Yeah.
And that helped a little bit, maybe. Yeah.
Turn over.
There you go. I was touching with my foot. And she stopped a little bit, then she was snoring a lot better. Yeah, I was petting Uzi too. Yeah, with my other foot. Yeah. That's a good boy. Yeah,
Okay.
she's just living up here, that's all.
Is that it?
Mm-hmm. I'm just living up with my mom.
Snoozing a little.
Yeah.
Okay, do you guys have any questions or comments? Do you see more? I mean, I know there's more connections in there, but I think it's just incredible how you can go back to Bereshit and find the similar themes in the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. And you see it in a later Torah portion. And now we take in the Haftarah, and the same themes are basically there. And to me, it's like you need to be really careful what comes out of your mouth, because innocent people might for what you foolishly say you're going to do or not do. I know as a school teacher, you know, you've got 30 kids in a class, hard to maintain control of 16-year-olds who were high on hormones. And, you know, it gets to the point one of those days, okay, the next person that does this is going to get that. And it's always the best student in the class that is doing it. That's not the one you expected to come out the door to greet you, like Jephthah. But I think this is the first year I've questioned it. I've always seen it as kind of a foolish girl. He just wasn't thinking. And I'm thinking like, well, maybe he was. Maybe he's trying to go back and say, you know what? I might be a questionable parent, but my family is going to maintain a high level of sexual morality as opposed to Lot, the descendants of Lot, and what they might be prone. What are they going to be prone to? Sexual immorality. That's how they were started. Incest. So I'll stop the recording.